The Death Guard of the 41st millennium are horrific parodies of their former selves. Warped by their servitude and dedication to the Chaos God Nurgle, each Marine is an incubator for 1,000 diseases. Their bodies are every shade of decay and infection, a multicolored canvas of corpse flesh and still living, rotting meat. Within their bodies, 1,000 small creatures wriggle and worm as they make their home in their diseased husks. Their madman grins made even more grotesque by the maggots and bloatflies that worm their way in and around the gangrenous gums, their tongues lolling out of their mouths, curling over blackened peg teeth as they give voice to a hearty chuckle. Each Marine is an avatar of entropy and rebirth, new life blossoming within them even as their bodies fall apart around them. They exude a haze of disease, their very presence being toxic to anyone that gets close, as they exhale plumes of toxic air from their wheezing lungs. Through all of this, though, the average Marine remains almost comically joyful, laughing at the horrors they inflict on their unfortunate enemies as their blades rise and fall with metronomic rhythm. But they were never made to be this. Once a proud legion, they fought in service to the Emperor for hundreds of years. From the killing fields of Terra to their final return to the homeworld, they were a legion of warriors rather than monsters. But what set them on this path? And what have they had to accept in order to be able to live with themselves? The 14th Legion began its existence in the waning years of the Unification Wars. Created from the stolen sons of the clans of Albia, they took their original name from their dread tactics. The Dusk Raiders would appear as the sun set, marching across open fields towards their foes, soaking up any firepower the enemy could send their way and giving worse in return. Their endurance was the stuff of legend, able to take hits that other legionaries could not. The fear many enemies felt as they saw the sun set meant that they were all too willing to lay down their arms rather than facing the grey revenants that would surely come for them in the dark. Their armour was stark and practical, but adorned with the modified symbols of the clans they hailed from. They also sported a single red arm and pauldron, signifying their status as the Emperor's bloody right hand, reaching out into the dark to crush any resistance to his conquest. As the Unification Wars ended and the Great Crusade began, the Dusk Raiders would continue to prove themselves in brutal wars of attrition despite their missing Primarch. For 80 years they would make war on the Emperor's enemies, enduring all hardships, taking all comers. They loomed over their enemies like the shadow of death itself, inexorable, unstoppable. The Dusk Raiders would go through a great change when their Primarch Mortarion was finally found by the Emperor upon the Death World Barbarous. Barbarous was a world of toxic clouds and wicked masters, the native humans having been made slaves by a race of diabolical Xenos lords, using them for gene experiments, creating monsters from the ones they stole, and keeping the rest subservient via use of the toxic chemicals that surrounded their mountaintop keeps. Mortarion had landed on this world shortly after the scattering of the Primarchs, and after being found by one of these Xenos lords, was taken in as a surrogate son, raised in their ways, and taught to oppress the people on the plains below their mountain fastness. But Mortarion was a son of the Emperor, and his instinct was not to oppress the humans below, but to help them. Breaking away from his Xenos father, he would become the leader of the human resistance on Barbarous, taking up a simple farming scythe and using it to slay their wicked creations. It was here that Mortarion would meet Callus Typhon. A half-breed, Callus was the offspring of an unholy union between one of the overlords and his human mother, who had been drowned by her fellows for the crime. Callus would be the first person that Mortarion would meet after defecting from his overlord father's control, and would help the nascent Primarch get to safety. The bond between these two would remain strong throughout their war, and Callus would become the first captain of Mortarion's future legion, his closest friend, and his worst enemy. One by one the oppressors would fall, their mountain fortresses torn down, their war beasts slaughtered, and their weapons taken so that they might be used to liberate rather than oppress. The constitutions of the unaugmented humans that served him was hardened by the toxic clouds, making them able to resist almost any poison. This war would rage until but one mountain hold remained, that of Mortarion's adoptive father. Though he and his Death Guard, the name that he had given his closest human soldiers, would try to breach the toxic clouds, they were simply too weak. Not even Mortarion could breach the toxic fog to scale the mountain, his Primarch physiology unable to keep up. And so they put all of their knowledge into creating a new type of powered armor, one that could withstand the toxic air. The end was right before him, the victory he had worked for over hundreds of battles now within reach. Returning to his base of operations to prepare, Mortarion would be told of the arrival of an incredible stranger, one who brought hope and salvation. He would barge into the hall, finding the elders sat in discussion with a being not of this world. His skin was bronzed, his stature singular. This was the first time that Mortarion would lay eyes on his father. The stranger would lay a challenge at Mortarion's feet. Slay the warlord alone, or serve him in totality. Not one to turn down a challenge such as this, Mortarion would set out alone to slay his adoptive father. The protective suit around him, proof against the clouds as he scaled the great peak. But it was not to be the great victory that Mortarion had envisioned. At the last hurdle, he would fail. The suit proved unable to protect him from the air, its contents so toxic that it dissolved the seals and breathing hoses that provided him air. Gasping on the deadly concoction, Mortarion would fall, dying even as the last warlord approached him, eager to end his adopted son's life, once and for all. The Emperor would not allow his son to be wasted and would intervene, slaying the warlord with a single cut of his flaming sword, and in saving him, would plant the seed of resentment. "I am here," said his Gene Father. "Is there something you wish to say to me, Mortarion? Speak your mind, if you will." There were cords on the belt around Mortarion's waist, and he used them to fashion a lanyard from which the lantern could hang. "I have many questions," he said at length. His voice rasped in the sudden quiet of the domed chamber. "But I will dismiss them all to know the answer to just one. Tell me why you took my victory from me on the day you came to my world." A rare flash of confusion flickered in the Emperor's eyes. "I did it to save my son's life. You would have died there on that mountain. The fiend who tormented you for so long, the only victory would have been his." He studied Mortarion for a long moment. "I could not let you perish, not after spending so long in search of you." "And yet it was your challenge that sent me there." "Was it? We may still have much to learn about one another, my son. But one thing is clear to me." The Emperor pointed at the lantern. "Is there anything in your life you have not done that has not been an act of rebellion? Of defiance? You faced Nakar by your choice. That door was already open." "You did not prevent me from stepping through." "He knew what you would do," said the inner voice. "He made you, after all. Who better to know how to play you?" A chilly, unknowable distance settled in the Emperor's manner. "A father is beholden to educate his sons. You learned a valuable lesson that day. I saw I had to remind you of your humility, Mortarion. There are some enemies you alone cannot defeat." "Never!" the silent voice bellowed in denial. "Never admit defeat!" Mortarion looked down at the weapon in his hand and considered the potential of it. For one giddy second, a dark and terrible question came to the forefront of his mind. What if I turned this on him? What would happen then? In the next second, the unutterable, unconscionable question melted away, and in its place there was emptiness. In the yawning abyss of his emotions, Mortarion saw a dim candle of need, an unformed want calling out for connection, for kinship. He crushed the sentiment without hesitation. He had brotherhood and fraternity among those he had shed blood with, and perhaps he might find it in the hearts of his Primarch brethren in the days to come. Given his Gene Father's ways, Mortarion did not doubt that others of his siblings might share a measure of the ambivalence he felt towards their shared progenitor. The Emperor allowed you to be taken when you were just a child. Then he found you again, only to diminish you. And for what? To mirror what Necair had done? At least the Overlord had been honest about his cruelty. Will you look beyond this, Mortarion? The Emperor offered his hand. Will you fight by my side in the Great Crusade, my son? I will. He took the offer, and the pact was made. I have no choice, he added. Mortarion would swear fealty to the Emperor, and in the wake of his failure to kill his adoptive father, would be given command of the 14th Legion, the Dusk Raiders. They would not remain the Dusk Raiders for long, however. As on his first meeting with his new sons, he would give them a name more fitting for the sons of the Lord of Death. You are my unbroken blades. You are the Death Guard. The core of this reformed legion would be made up of Mortarion's most loyal human soldiers. Sent through the process to turn them into Astartes, figures such as Typhon would be placed at its head. The cultures of old Albia and Barbarous would be placed side by side, and as more of the original Dusk Raiders died in battle and were replaced by Barbarans, the culture of Albia would dwindle almost entirely, their stoic obedience replaced with a dour and cruel demeanor. Their tactics changed little, however, the massed infantry formations that they had favored before remaining a staple of the Death Guard's new way of war. Though in many ways they would lean even further into this, through their ability to withstand any toxin, any environment, any circumstance, any injury, they would become a truly formidable force. The line of invaders was wide and thin. There were at most 10,000 soldiers, he thought. He felt anxious, and he felt eager. That small number had taken Protarchos. They were formidable, but they were in the open now, outnumbered more than 100 to 1 and facing tanks. Their strength and their skill hardly mattered anymore. The guns of the leading tanks came down, and they fired the first salvo. Shells exploded along the line of the enemy. They were still more than a kilometer away. Tosserat could just make out the shattered silhouettes of bodies hurled into the air. He leant forward, excited, tasting victory. His goggles were filthy. It was so tempting to take them off and see. Something flashed in the air above him, bright and sharp. The concussion came a moment later, muffled, almost modest, and somehow ominous. Other flashes appeared further down the line to both sides of him. Tosserat frowned, puzzled. There was no effect that he could see. Then he was throwing up, violently, painfully, suddenly. The vomit filled his respirator, and he inhaled it back in. Choking and vomiting again, he clawed the hood off his enviro suit. He collapsed over the turret, vertigo and pain bursting in his head. He took a deep breath of poisoned air, and choked again. Tank veered off course, its engine screamed, and the vehicle waved drunkenly, crushing prostrate, dying infantry. It shook Tosserat like a rag doll. He was barely conscious of the movement. His head was burning. His eyes were burning. His lungs and his gut were burning too. He clutched at his forehead, and his skin sloughed away, sticking to his gloves. He tried to scream, but his body was already past that frontier. Before his eyes melted from his skull, he glimpsed another tank careening his way. He was dead before the collision. The rad bombs went off over the Order's front line. The launched munitions burst, and the invisible killer did its work. As Mortarion led the charge into the poisoned wastes, the effect of the rad weapons was immediate. Drivers died at their controls, guns went silent, tanks slewed to a stop or careened out of control. The armored columns were tight, and the collisions were immediate. Tangled masses of metal blocked the path to those coming up from behind, and the radiation was not alone. "Keep up the launches," Mortarion ordered. "Scorch the earth." For the first stage of the assault, the 10,000 legionaries were spread out as far as possible. They formed a single rank, wide enough to confront the mass formation of the Order, and to lure the enemy forward with the illusion of a foolish, brittle line of attack. The enemy's barrage was taking its toll, but the distance between each legionary was such that no single explosion could do more than kill a single warrior. Anything less than a direct hit was not enough to stop the advance of one of the Death Guard. and from the advance came a steady launch of rad and chem munitions. The 14th Legion turned the land ahead of them into a strip of poison, unseen in the toxic air, but infinitely more lethal than Galaspar's atmosphere. There was no protection in the enviro suit or inside the hull of a tank. The tank slowed, died, and crashed. The infantry died as they caught up with the armor, their bodies liquefied and turned to muck under the treads of the tanks. The forward movement of the Order's army slowed, while the Death Guard kept going at a steady, inexorable pace. The line was a scythe blade, coming to slice through the enemy. Phosphex spread its green fire. One bomb after another went off, creating a long, unbroken liquid cloud. Tanks burned, and the flames reached inside to find the screaming flesh. Soldiers broke and fled, and the agony followed, an all-devouring beast. The Order's advance stopped completely. The front line was blackened and still. Toxic fumes rose from where the Phosphex had passed, and the radiation would linger for much longer. It was death for any mortal to enter that zone. An early victory, Mortarion thought. It was also one that meant little. The army was in range of the Hive, and its arrival had forced the confrontation with the Death Guard. It wasn't a war the Death Guard could win without the support of the fleet. What he had to do was keep the Order from realizing that for as long as possible.
"Longer arcs,"
he voxed.
"Kill them from behind and in front."
He hurled more Phosphex bombs, sending them hundreds of meters to the rear, and then rushed forward. At the edges of his vision, he saw his legion follow his example. They attacked as a single blade. Mortarion ran through the zone of death and into the next ranks of the enemy. They had pulled back slightly, and their guns were lowered. They fired a hail of shells straight ahead. A gun swiveled in Mortarion's direction. It was slow, he was fast. He leapt up over it, landed on top of the turret, and slammed silence into the barrel of the gun. The scythe cut through the metal, and Mortarion jumped again to the side of the tank, coming down in the midst of the infantry. Panicked by the spreading death on both sides of them, then jolted by the apparition that landed among their ranks, they screamed and fired wildly. Mortarion swept silence in a wide arc. Heads fell like rain. He then sprinted to the next tank over and gouged its cannon too as it tried to swing his way. He was onto the next vehicles behind by the time the two tanks fired. The shells exploded in the damaged barrels, and the blast had lifted off the turrets. Screams and flames surrounded Mortarion. He was death, and he was sweeping his curse through the enemy. He was the front point of a wave of destruction, and in his wake, his legionaries brought more of the same. Death spread wide and far over the Order. Hundreds of soldiers died with every passing second. More tanks collided, more exploded. Destruction reigned.
"You are my unbroken blades,"
Mortarion voxed to his sons.
"Our losses make us stronger, for the enemy sees our indomitable advance and knows we cannot be stopped. You are one with me, my sons, and I with you."
He flew from vehicle to vehicle, disabling each with a quick strike and moving on before the effect of his attack was felt or known. He stayed high and visible to his legionaries, that they could see him in the same blade.
"The blade that is best forged cuts deepest. This is our furnace. This is our making,"
Mortarion shouted. Born of Terra or of Barbarous, the legionaries responded to his call. They knew themselves, regardless of their home planet, to be his sons. His saw them strike with a fluid, deadly unity, and their great scythe tore deep wounds into the foe. When Mortarion reached an area his Phosphex bombs had devastated, he paused amidst the corpses and stilled machinery to hurl more bombs ahead. He ate further and further into the army. For entire minutes after the initial bombardment, the Order was helpless. The cannons all but silent as rank after rank died before any counterattack against the Death Guard could be taken. But the Death Guard were a legion with a crack in it, a small fissure in Mortarion's pride that would ultimately lead them to Horus's side, and onwards to catastrophe. The spurned pride of their Primarch would fester over years. The feelings that the Emperor had used Mortarion, goaded him, and ultimately stolen his victory from him would simmer within his heart. Too proud to give voice to his feelings, over time it would grow to become a roiling cauldron of hate, seeing the Emperor as just another tyrant, and him and his sons as just more slaves, ultimately disposable, just like the warlord that he had called father on Barbarous. This, combined with the corruption of Callus Typhon during the Zariman campaign, would create the perfect scenario for the Death Guard to be brought into Nurgle's embrace. Typhon would spread his corruption quietly, turning those closest with him to the worship of chaos even as the lodges planted the seeds of rebellion. When Horus came to seek allies for his betrayal, Mortarion was among the first he contacted. A Mortarion would gladly accept. To him, it was a choice between a tyrant of a father or his most trusted brother. Together, along with Fulgrim and Angron, they would plan to purge the loyalist elements of their legions on Istvan III, though Mortarion's care for one of his sons would ultimately be the cause of the discovery of Horus's treachery. Istvan III would become a funeral pyre for the loyalists within the Death Guard, sons of Horus, Emperor's children, and World Eaters. Individual Marines were identified and handpicked by Horus and his brothers to be sent to the Coral City, given the task of taking it for the Imperium and killing the traitor governor. But these loyal men would be betrayed. In the fleet above, Horus would give the order to load virus bombs into the warship's guns, ready to cleanse all life from the surface in an effort to eradicate all loyalist elements from their legions in one fell swoop. His plan would be thwarted though, the loyalist captain Saul Tarvitz, discovering this plot and in a desperate escape to save them, would take a Thunderhawk to the planet below, pursued by Imperial Navy fighters. Though Tarvitz would likely have been killed in the attempt, it was the actions of Battle Captain Nathaniel Garrow of the Death Guard that would save him. Years before, Tarvitz and Garrow would swear an oath of loyalty to one another, trusting each other completely. It was this bond that gave Garrow all the evidence he needed, shooting down the pursuing fighters, the resulting explosion causing enough interference for Tarvitz to escape and warn the men on the world below. The only remaining loyalist not on the planet, Garrow would prevent his fellow Captain Grulgor from firing on the world below, killing him in the resulting battle amongst the virus bombs. During the fight, a virus bomb casing was cracked, and the traitors were sealed inside of the bay in order to save the ship, their final moments spent choking on their own melting insides. Garrow would eventually escape with his ship, the Eisenstein, to warn Rogel Dawn of Horus's betrayal. Mortarion's mercy in giving him a chance had proven faithful for the loyalist cause indeed. The Horus heresy had begun, and the Death Guard would begin their descent into inevitable corruption. The first glimpse of this future was seen by Garrow and his men aboard the Eisenstein. During their escape through the warp, the Chaos God Nurgle would reach into the ship and touch the bodies of the traitor Marines and their captain Grulgor, resurrecting them as the first Plague Marines. It was in this place, on the port side some 10 or so strides from the 97th hull frame, that Death Guard met Death Guard in open conflict. Garrow saw the misshapen things from a distance and thought that the strange, plague-bearing creatures they encountered at the Navis Sanctorum were before them once more. But he realized quickly that the size was wrong, that these diseased freaks were the match in height for the Astartes. When they hove into the light, what he saw sent him skidding to a halt, his free hand coming to his mouth in shock.
"In the Emperor's name," choked Haker. "What horror is this?"
Garrow's blood turned to ice in his veins. The awful vision that seemed to transmit itself from the dying adjutant was suddenly here before him, written in reality over the mutated, swollen parodies of Death Guard warriors. The same corpse pallor green of their battle armor, the same slack faces rippled with growths of broken tooth and horn, flesh stretched tight over bodies teeming with colonies of maggots. Voyen had joined Garrow and the others at the entrance to the corridor, and even the apothecary, hardened to the sights of disease and malady, retched at the sight of the twisted man-things. The vision had been a warning, Garrow realized, a glimpse of what he encountered here, and perhaps of what a failure might engender. Around the legs of the abnormal Astartes were things that were once members of the Eisenstein's crew, men caught halfway through the venomous ravages of the Life Eater and suspended there, flesh in tatters and organs awash with ichor. They bayed and scrambled forward to attack Garrow's warriors. Decius led the firing as the Death Guard let fly with bolters and flamers. The battle captain waded into the fight, bolter and sword as one in arcs of death, slicing through diseased meat and matter teeming with parasites, cutting towards the monster. In the play of battle, Garrow's mind retreated to the familiar paths of war drills, of melee patterns ingrained in muscle and sinew from thousands of hours of combat. In this state, it should have been easy for him to shutter away the chilling horror these warp-spawn terrors represented. to simply fight and concentrate on that alone. The reverse was the reality, however. Garrow had seen the virus savage these men. He had heard their dying screams from the other side of the blast doors only hours earlier, and they stood before him, transformed into some living embodiment of disease, the freakish parody of life sustained by no manner that he could fathom. Was it sorcery? Could such a thing exist in the Emperor's secular cosmos? Garrow's carefully constructed world of deeply held truths and hard-edged realities was crumbling with each passing hour, as if the universe had elected to pick apart what he thought to be true and show him the lie of it. With a near physical effort, the Death Guard forced the inner turmoil into silence, dragging his mind to the single struggle of the fighting. Close by, Voyan took a glancing blow from a bolt shell that spattered thick fluid against his shoulder pauldron. The apothecary reeled to dodge a peculiar morning star of knobbed bone. The weapon found purchase instead in the throat of a junior warrior who died clawing at the cancerous wound it left behind. Garrow snarled and his bolter echoed him, a burst of fire slamming the killer back off his feet. The battle captain cursed as the mutant Astarte shivered and then pulled itself slowly upwards, leaking tainted blood and viscera. The bolter should have ended its life outright. He stormed in and took the traitor's head with his sword, finishing the job. Still, the shambling, filth-encrusted monstrosities came on, the press of their bodies dividing the lines of Garrow's warriors, bunching around them as Grolgor moved to and fro, staying beyond close combat range. Perhaps he should not have been surprised to find these mutants hard to kill. Their advance mimicked the battle doctrine of the 14th Legion, the dogged and relentless progress that formed the core of the Death Guard's infantry dogma. They were matched closely, of that there was no doubt, but Garrow's men were only Astartes, and as the Emperor was his witness, he had no true understanding of what his enemies were. Garrow knew only that an abhorrence had taken root in him, and that these loathsome perversions of his brethren must be destroyed. This was a preview of what the Death Guard would become, a vision of Nurgle's true plan for his most favoured legion. Horus heresy would see the Death Guard turned upon the empire they had once protected. They would make war upon their brothers on hundreds of battlefields, from the fields of the Dropsite Massacre, through the Battle of Molech, the Siege of Inwit, the Battle for Beta Garman, and finally, the road to Terra. During this time, Mortarion would make a fateful decision. Usually despising all warp sorcery, he enacted a ritual to summon the essence of Grolgor from the warp. Now a demon of Nurgle, and infused with the Life-Eater virus that had killed him the first time, it would be used as a weapon of diabolical potency. The aura of death surrounding him laying waste to entire battlefields. This was Mortarion's first step towards his servitude to Nurgle, though at the time he didn't know it, in his arrogance believing that something such as Grolgor would serve him as a simple soldier. The ultimate fate of the Death Guard would be decided on the route to Terra. Becalmed in the warp by the machinations of Callous Typhon and beset by the Destroyer virus, the Death Guard would suffer in unimaginable pain, their endurance working against them to keep them alive through the worst torment a being can know. Mortarion would clash with his first captain as he was revealed to have betrayed him, engineering the death of their astropaths. With the help of Grolgor, Mortarion would plan to murder Typhon. But it wouldn't be that simple. As they fought, the essence of Grolgor would merge with Typhon, seeping into his body, mutating and changing it beyond recognition, even as it decayed and rotted. A great horn exploded from Typhon's brow, flutes of bone cracking from the back of his Terminator plate as he became the host for the Destroyer virus. Callous Typhon had died, but Typhus, champion of Nurgle, had risen from the ashes. Unable to stand his son's torment any longer, Mortarion would do anything to save them. And in a moment of desperation, he would give his loyalty and the loyalty of his sons to the god of decay, Nurgle. Swear your loyalty to me. Bowed down upon one knee, Mortarion could not hold his gaze towards the black, blasted mud of Barbarous, and he looked up into the shining eyes of the newcomer. The stranger's words seemed to stop the passage of time. An aura of power, vast and barely contained, crackled about him. He looked into Mortarion's eyes and saw into the murky depths of his soul, to the lost and forgotten places within that the Reaper of Men kept hidden even from himself. Mortarion's jaw stiffened. He did not want to be an open book. He didn't want to
give your fealty to the Grandfather.
Bowed down upon one knee, Mortarion could not hold his gaze towards the rusted, broken steel of the Terminus Est, and he looked up into the menacing eyes of the great entity that swallowed the wild sky. The god thing's utterance made the strings of reality hum and resonate. A dark ether of corruption was falling like thick sleet, thickening the space around him. The entity that called itself the Grandfather filled Mortarion's lungs with spores of living death and opened him up from within, teasing apart sealed spaces to find the rich meat of his unseen fears and his most secret hopes. Mortarion's fists clenched. He could feel his soul ripped bare. There was, "You have chosen the only path you can."
"You have chosen the only path you can,"
said his father, said the Grandfather. "You are my son.
"You are my champion."
And I have waited so very long for you, and this day's dawning has been long awaited. Time and moment, past and present, the structures of them crumbled and turned into sand, smothering Mortarion in the Elsewhen. He was there on Barbarous, and it was decades gone, and he was here in the utter insanity of the Immaterium. Together and separated, divided and merging. His father, the Emperor of Mankind, his patron, the Lord of Decay, Nurgle, beckoned him, offering Mortarion what he could not refuse. His oath and his honor forbade him from taking any other path from this moment forward. He had sworn to bend the knee to the stranger at the lodge if he could not defeat the High Overlord, and he had vowed to protect his gene sons and his legion beyond all else. Mortarion struggled, frantically trying to grasp the truth and the lies, desperate to separate the ragged, deathly presence from the echoing ashen past. Which was his reality, or were all things true?
"What price is an oath given in madness?"
He whispered the words. He howled them into the void.
"What price is an oath given in madness?"
"What do you want, my son?"
"What do you want, my champion?"
The voices merged into a single titanic reverberation, through his bones and physical form, into the bounds of his turbulent and unquiet psyche.
"I want to endure."
"Then rise," said the stranger. "Rise, Mortarion. There is a brotherhood awaiting you out in the stars, the like of which you cannot comprehend, and with it a purpose that will illuminate the galaxy, a crusade upon which your name will be etched into eternity."
"Then rise,"
the Grandfather told him.
"Rise as a prince born of death. Vengeance awaits you in the realm of men, and with it, the blackest, most dire purpose. A slaughter by which your name will be feared until the last human soul fades to entropy."
Mortarion said the vow without reservation, then.
"I give myself to your banner, my blood and bone, the unbroken force of my will and the power of my spirit. These are yours to command if you grant me deliverance."
His hound found the damaged, cracked blade of his war scythe, and he gripped it hard enough to cut metal and draw blood.
"By this I so swear."
He looked down and saw the transformation take hold of him. A force of immeasurable mutational power crashed through his physical form and overwhelmed the pitiful limits of flesh and blood. Mortarion tore away, rising to his feet, changing with each heartbeat. From his spine burst pestilent, insectile wings that quivered and cracked with new change. His soul soaked in the corrupting energy, dying and living, reborn and obliterated. The flesh across his gaunt features pulled tight, dragging his mouth into a rictus grin, the smile of death itself. He would endure.
"Welcome home, welcome home, welcome home,
welcome home, welcome home," said the voices. The Death Guard that emerged from the warp would be hideously changed, each one a diseased juggernaut. Insane, they would find wicked joy in their new forms, the resilience that their decaying bodies gave them lending itself to their way of war. If before they were resilient, now they were unstoppable. But it wouldn't be easy. For many Death Guard, their minds are split. The warriors that they were are understandably disgusted with their new form, even as the insanity that they've submitted to allows them to find joy in it. Their old selves scream as their minds sink into a swamp of decay, slowly drowning as they submit to their fate, quietly told by their god that it loves them, even as it warps and destroys their bodies. This false joy is shown most starkly at the times when the warp recedes from them, and clarity is brought to their addled minds. The traitors shambled to a complete halt. Silent resistance was replaced by a kind of bewilderment, a loss of momentum, for reasons that their sluggish minds had no power left to explain. They could feel their master's withdrawal, not his death, his withdrawal. as if he had just decided, on a whim, to leave them to it. The surge of concentrated energy they had been riding dissipated, echoing down the long halls before blowing emptily out of the spaceport's gigantic vents, a spent force, a busted flush. On the physical front, nothing had changed, but the Unbroken were more than physical now. They were tied into the grand bargains of the Warp, its alliances and its contracts, and something had gone badly amiss, something unforeseen, inexplicable and terminal.
We fall back.
That was the proposal. That was, seriously now, what Crozius was advocating. Morag couldn't respond. It was like the oxygen had been suddenly taken away, rendering him powerless. Something you had unconsciously relied on, never thinking about, now gone, yanked beyond your grasp and leaving you to suffocate. He reeled, falling to his knees. He had been so powerful. The dead of the Fifth were all around him, slain by his hand. He had begun to enjoy himself, just as Crozius had done for a while. He had started to stop obsessing, to relish the painful gifts he had been given. Now he looked up and barely saw a thing out of his smeared helm lenses. He would have taken it off, except he wasn't sure he could. Through the murk, at distance, he saw more of those damned Chagorians advancing. They weren't running now. They weren't trying to force the pace, compensating for their fragility with elusive movement. They had gone mad, seemingly. Had they done this to them? Had the Unbroken delivered so much pain that they had changed, just as the Death Guard had on the Terminus Est? Was such a transition possible? Had the White Scars discovered some new and terrible god of their own? He couldn't even begin to process that. His head was ringing, his stomach felt empty, his hearts were yammering. Crozius had ceased his chatter and was now limping away, back through the mire. The demon he carried in his arm was screaming, and that was a horrible sound. Morag lurched up onto his hooves and started to stumble after him.
Wait!
He tried, reaching out.
Fall back!
Crozius slurred. Morag caught up, snatching his elbow, forcing him to stop.
We never retreat.
Just looking at the old apothecary's ruined armor was unsettling. It disgusted him. He'd always seen those changes, to some degree. But now he was really seeing them, as they must look to an outsider. By the god, what had they become? Once you stripped away the haze of forgetfulness, once you turned the lights on, you could see right through it. Over the next 10,000 years of war, the Death Guard would sink further and further into the embrace of Grandfather Nurgle. Their minds all but eradicated by the diseases they harbor. They are fully sunk into the swamp. Their minds simply accepting their lot in life. As the thoughts of disgust and fear are slowly carved away, leaving them as husks of their former selves, completely subservient to the god that did this to them. In time, they have convinced themselves that their god truly loves them, that what has been done to them is a gift, not a curse. And through it all, they simply continue. That old doctrine of war, marching forwards no matter the cost, no matter what becomes of them. They simply keep moving forwards, either accepting their current state or simply ignoring it.
So, what do I see when I look in a mirror?
Philemon asks, ignoring the demon.
I do not look, so I do not know. Perhaps the sight would pain me. I suspect it would not. You don't look so good yourself. I suggest you stay away from them too.
Out of all of the legions, this shared experience, as well as their fierce loyalty to Mortarion, has meant that they remain whole despite the efforts of Typhus and the Astartes loyal to him. Their great companies remain mostly unchanged, and unlike most traitor legions, they are able to call upon their entire strength at the command of their Primarch. But Nurgle is not the benevolent god it claims to be. It is a manipulator, an abuser, inflicting the very pain that he offers to take away in return for fealty. The Death Guard are a legion of abused sons. Kept loyal through the pain inflicted on them, they are entirely trapped in his service, their choice made for them by their father, and never given back. Though many of their number are ostensibly happy with their lot in life, it is a false joy, brought about by immense trauma and rationalization of the irrational, revealed to be a farce every time the influence of the warp recedes from them for even a second. As a legion, they have submitted to the entropy that was forced upon them, and convinced themselves that they have somehow benefited from this torture, simply because they are prevented from feeling it.